Hi, everybody, and welcome to our latest edition of the Time for Impact podcast. This is our second recording in a week. It's Chris Wade here, and my co-host Matt is with us too. Hi, Matt. It's good to see you again, twice in a few days.
Hi, Chris. Yeah, good to see you again. There's a lot to talk about at the moment in the world of volunteering. What an exciting time to be speaking to lots of exciting and interesting people with lots of big and interesting ideas. I'm really excited for another conversation.
Yeah, and we'll see if we can cover it all today, see how we get on. So, as always, we try to bring you someone as a guest who's going to bring some creative and maybe even provocative thinking in the world of volunteering, to try and get us to think outside the box, bring some new insights into our volunteering, and hopefully their thinking will inspire our thinking and our action as well as we go forward. So who have we got today, you ask yourself? Well, we've got Elena Laguna from, well, you tell us where you're from in a second, Elena, but I've known Elena for some while as a bit of an experienced volunteering executive, certainly a specialist in all things volunteering and organizational development as well. Some of you, those of you all over LinkedIn recently, probably would have seen some interesting articles. I certainly did, that she put out, and hoping we'll start to explore some of those as we get into the conversation. But Elena, do you want to start by, introducing yourself better than I just did, and telling us a bit about your history in volunteerism? And
Such a pleasure to be here today, Chris and Matt. I love a good conversation about volunteering. It lifts me up. When you open the newspapers and the news, and it makes you really depressed, talking about communities and volunteering and the power of people is something that makes me really happy. So I'm a people specialist at heart. That's me. I love volunteering. I'm a volunteering dreamer. I have been working in the organizational development space, learning and development, but always in the volunteer sector. I have worked for large organizations such as British Red Cross, Oxfam, and St. John Ambulance, but I have also supported for many years smaller organizations, grassroots, community-based organizations that they also do an amazing work in their communities to really ensure that they thrive and that the people is giving back to them. So that's me. I started in the volunteer sector as a young volunteer. I first volunteered for the International Citizen Service. So I went, off for 4 months to Central America, to Nicaragua, and I was supporting a local charity working on a kind of volunteering as a youth leader in a water and sanitation project. So when I came back to the UK, it was kind of like a bold moment. I don't want to go back to work in the private sector. I want to work in a purpose-led organization. I want to work for the charity sector. I have never looked back. It has transformed my life. It have changed who I am and how I navigate life now as an adult. And it was truly that experience really stayed with me for forever.
It's really interesting that the number of guests who come on here and who've had not necessarily the same experience, but have had an experience as a young person, as a volunteer, and it's really shaped their involvement as leaders in our organizations and in our sector. So it's we often talk here about volunteering is a habit or that we want to grow, a muscle we want to flex in young people, so they carry on volunteering in our organizations and in our communities throughout their lifetime. But actually, it seems that it's more than that. Actually, it actually encourages people to come and work in our sector as well, which is fabulous, and that's why we've got such great people.
Absolutely. And I think it really helps you connect with people with whom you wouldn't have had that opportunity before. It really helps you connect with humans as a human at a human level, opens your mind and your creativity and how you see the work and who you want to be in the workplace. So I think it's more than just giving time or doing something interesting. It really connects with who we are as humans. And I think that's That's the power of volunteering, really.
Yeah, for sure. So, Elena, we had a conversation on the back of the articles that you put on LinkedIn, which we'll put in the show notes for everybody else to read if they've not already read it. In the first of those, you're talking about flex volunteering, which I think is your own title, as opposed to micro volunteering. Do you want to talk us through your thinking?
Today, it's the death announcement of micro volunteering.
Yeah.
We are not micro volunteering anymore. We are flex volunteering. And that was a moment, Chris. So someone was talking to me about micro volunteering and how for a long time we have been talking about micro volunteering. It's not a new thing. Charities and volunteer leaders have been talking about micro volunteering for a number of years now. Yet we haven't seen a significant change in how people are given genuine opportunities to donate their time, their skills in a way that works for them. So I thought maybe it's this micro concept that is making the whole thing smaller. Maybe that's not giving us the opportunity to think creatively. Micro volunteering opened the doors. And what I put in the article is that what we need now is to kind of dismantle, the door and build it in a whole entrance. An entrance that is wider, that it has a shape for many different groups and peoples and backgrounds and skill sets, and is not as rigid as a short-term opportunity, but still in a specific pattern. And we're looking for a specific profile. And if you don't fit this box, even though it's a smaller box or a box that is not as demanding as other volunteering boxes, it's still a box that you expect people to fit in. So it's the idea of thinking big about how people give their time to charities, is giving us the opportunity to put the individual at the heart of it, because at the end of the day, volunteering is the collective effort. But collective is nothing, is the made up of individuals. So it's when those people are seen and heard and they feel appreciated that the collective is stronger. You don't have a great collective, a great group of volunteers out of nowhere, out of the blue without support. Is those individuals feel that they play a role, a meaningful role in what they're doing.
In some ways, is this before we get into the collective bit, it reminded me of the sort of my early days of non-volunteering work when I was working in engineering, and you had people on the factory floor, so who had roles, so engineers, various people doing various tasks. The idea of micro there was almost like piecemeal, putting people onto factory lines, doing the same job over and over again, doing a job that's predefined for them, regardless of their skills, their interests, their appetites. No interest at all in what gets them excited or what gets them involved in the organisation, and very little collective engagement apart from they were a cog in the wheel, if you like. And I wonder with micro volunteering whether we've been in danger of saying, still keeping that resourcing mindset that this is what we want people to do, rather than this is a cause, how would you like to engage in it?
That's right. I think it's about thinking, what is the outcome? What do we want to achieve? Where do we want to get? And where are the skills that we need and the behaviors to help us achieve that? And you're absolutely right. It's when volunteering, I mean, don't get me wrong, I do acknowledge the enormous pressure that charity workers, volunteer managers, are under at the moment. It's really difficult to curate an experience for a volunteer, for a group of volunteers, or for an entire organization. It's really difficult to curate your own experience, to have time for reflection, have time for learning. So I don't underestimate, the pressure that people are under and how difficult it is to create individualized spaces for volunteering to genuinely thrive. But that's my point, really, is that we're working really, really hard. And what we really need to do is to work really, really smart. And we need to put the energy and the efforts into what is going to make that experience better. Obviously, there are a number of things that organizations want to achieve, aligned with their strategy, aligned with their values, things that still they want to achieve. It cannot be a free for all.
Yeah, yeah.
But those, you need to start with the outcome in mind, with the change and the impact in mind, and then attract people, volunteers, and talent to help achieve those outcomes. So if you start with the responsibilities in mind, you are going to do this, A, B, and C.
Mm.
And then, the outcome might well be what you have in mind or not. But if you start with the outcome in mind, you are more likely to collectively get your volunteers there.
If you,
That's my take on.
and if you have the outcome in mind, and more importantly, your supporters and your volunteers have the same outcome in mind, then actually, is there not more chance of finding a whole myriad of ways of reaching that outcome that us as volunteer managers, as individuals, can't create everything. We can't come up with all the ideas ourselves, and we certainly can't manage them all because we have finite energy and money to do that. But if the focus is on the shared focus, in the sense, is on the outcome, on the impact, and we can define the sort of parameters to a degree, so people aren't, let's just say, doing a free for all, then actually we can allow people to bring in their passions, their skills, their experiences,
Exactly.
and with a little bit of guidance, find their own solutions. But that can be in a way, presumably, that doesn't take on loads and loads of work for a volunteer manager. Because you used the word curate, and I really like that, and we use that quite a lot on this podcast. But curating an experience is very different from use that word again, micro managing an activity or a task or a role. And for me, there's something about actually let's convene people together and curate an experience where people can take their own flexible involvements.
Exactly. And it's the idea of moving away from micro opportunities for a fewer more people to join, to curate an experience that is inclusive and welcoming for many, many more people, and most importantly, from people from whom you haven't heard before. So I think that's the shift. And the conversation is two ways. Is one, in terms of participation numbers, regardless of how much we have been talking about micro volunteering, still we haven't seen big numbers in terms of increasing participation, but it's the same in terms of diversity, Chris. It's
Yes.
exactly the same. We haven't
Yes.
seen a shift. So to generally move, turn the dial and to create spaces that are opportunities for people to belong, you have to be intentional. And it cannot just be on the volunteer manager. It has to be the collective learning effort, and an experienced volunteer generally being intentional about mentoring someone who is new is about someone who is new feeling that they can ask the silly questions and getting it wrong. And I think generally there is something from volunteering that HR people teams can learn about employees as well. There is volunteering is by definition is an equalizer. It has to be. I have been working with group of volunteers made up of coordinators, administrators, and chief executives, all doing the
Mm-hmm.
same job, all working towards the same outcome and the same objective. And so it's generally an equalizer. It's about bringing people together from different skills and backgrounds to do something that is the collective priority for many. And I think there is a huge value in that. And I think in the new I'm going to say the word AI
Mm-hmm.
era, that connection and that collective effort is going to genuinely make people feel good about what's going on in the world.
I'm interested, I suppose, in why we sometimes default back to the ways and like less flexibility, if that makes sense. What stops us doing this? I think I've been around in the sector long enough that I've heard people talking about flexibility for over a decade, probably, and the importance of it. And I really buy into this idea. But what holds us back? Like, what's getting in the way of realizing this? Why are we all not just doing more of this? Is it everyone I speak to tends to think this is a good thing, but we often just don't seem to be able to deliver it.
How do we make it
Why?
happen? Yeah, how do we make it happen? That's a really good question, Matt. First of all, it's scary. We have for decades been made believe that you have to perform either at work or in volunteering in a very specific way. These are your 10 responsibilities, and this is what you have to do. And you're being assessed, your performance is being assessed against that criteria. And it's either you are ticking the 10 boxes or you're only ticking 8 or none of them. So is the idea of, I think what is really preventing us from achieving the flexibility and what you're referring to, Matt, is the lack of thinking about the end goal, the end point, like reversing the whole thing and stop thinking about what it has to be done today, this month, this year, to where the impact of this work is going to take us. What is going to be the good for that community, for that group of people, for that organization. So it's literally shifting, and that's not easy because we are hardwired for security and stability and bringing disruption and changing systems and mindsets and job descriptions that were created many years ago. It's difficult, particularly in regulated environments and in places where that's how things have been done for centuries or decades. So I think we need to start thinking more about volunteer impact, and then gradually we can move away from that ticking box exercise or that responsibilities driven kind of volunteering performance that we are still very much that you will see in most organizations. If you go out there and you check on some of the websites, most role descriptions are all about this is what you have to do. It's not about if you come and join us, this is what is the impact that you're going to make. This is the good things that are going to happen as a result of you putting your mind, your heart, and your skills in it.
Is it like to share sort of two of perhaps my own hypothesis on this around some of this, which I think are interesting, I suppose. Like part of my feeling, I think, on that is that we often design things that are not about work with the sort of paradigms of work. So people have job descriptions. So we create role descriptions for volunteers, and that is so we like automatically map those things over, and we map those processes and systems over because that's the sort of the familiar playbook we often go to because it's what it's what years of volunteering has been based on, but what's sort of been determined to be good practice in the sector as well for a long time as well, that you are clear about someone's roles and responsibilities, so you have a role description because it's useful that people know what they're here to do.
Exactly.
That leads you to defining that. So some of it involves changing that. I also wonder if some of it, sort of my second hypothesis, I suppose, about whether or how possible it is to some people who volunteer, particularly in a sort of quite a careerist way, like they're all in on volunteering with a particular organization or doing a particular thing, very much part of their identity. It feels like there's a risk that there is potentially maybe a bit of a tension between the sort of the careerist volunteer and the flex volunteer. Like, how do you help both of those people understand that their contribution is equally valid, and that for the careerist volunteer, success isn't actually just about getting more people doing more like them, if that makes sense. And equally, probably people are looking for more flexible approaches that that actually it's okay to be all in on things, and that some people who are all in are perhaps gonna take on more responsibility or are going to have more of a role in perhaps shaping or connection to a cause, I suppose. I don't know if I've articulated that.
I think as I reflect on what you say, Matt, I think there is something, it's time for impact, right? If we want to really focus on impact, we need to define those roles with the communities we support, which is a significant shift for particularly large, historic or volunteer-led organizations. So if you think about what we want to achieve, what these skills, people, minds, hearts are going to help us achieve in those communities, what are the changes we want to see in those communities, then it's much easier to step away from a list of responsibilities that you inherited from many years ago to a purpose-driven activity where people that volunteers are enabling and supporting are generally having a say on how that support is given to them. So this is how you can move away from a rigid way of performing in volunteering to a community-led and outcome-led volunteering activity and impact.
I think that's really interesting, that reflection on impact. It is that saying, isn't it? We are what we measure. And I spend a lot of time now in Time for Impact doing exactly that, helping organisations really start to measure the impact of volunteering as opposed to the activity of volunteering. Most organisations, and it really is, I mean, 80-90% of organisations I come across are measuring activity. Even their impact reports, we talk about the number of volunteers, the number of volunteer hours given, the number of people visited, the number of ambulance driven, number of people driven home from hospital. It's all activity. It's not impact on the bigger picture, the long-term outcomes of people's life.
Exactly.
Expectations, like people quality of life, the impact on the environment, whatever the cause may be. And if, I suppose, our organizational and including our leadership focus is perpetually on activity. And I've lost count of the amount of times I've spoken to somebody who said, oh yeah, all my board wants me to do is get more volunteers. If our focus is on activity, then I suppose there is some inevitability that the things that we will put our efforts into are going to be activity based too, getting more people doing roles, more micro activities, and more focus on counting those activities and less impact on actually finding the solutions that collectively as a community deliver long-term outcomes and impact for the organizations we all work and volunteer for. So there's a mindset shift and a leadership shift, it feels, in there for me. The two things, impact, I think you're right, impact and activity design and experience curation kind of go hand in hand.
And most importantly, societal changes, Chris, because people don't have the same expectations. People are not going to put up
No.
with the same things when they join an organization. People might, our competitors at Netflix, thousands and thousands of charities out there, activities. It's the current climate is not a climate that allows for a lot of time to give and a lot of money to be given. People are being very intentional, mindful where they donate their money and where they donate their time. So the idea of curating an experience, Chris, is not just because we are nice people and we want to be very welcoming and have something nice for people to do. Is really, if you are not intentional about how you welcome people to your organization, they won't turn up for a second shift.
No.
Because there are thousands of charities out there looking for volunteers. There are thousands of business, social enterprises. As I said, Netflix, for starters, people would rather stay home and watch something than join a charity that is not providing a good experience where people from all walks of life can feel that they belong.
100%.
And it feels like Netflix is a good point of departure in some ways. Is that in terms of it feels like if we're going to be more like Netflix, right? Because that's who we're competing against, then we need to think more like Netflix in how we are designing and how we're executing our work, which is about thinking big and trying things and experimenting and ultimately sort of doing things differently, right? I guess.
Absolutely. And I didn't expect talking about Netflix today while talking about volunteering, but you're right. In terms of experience, when you open the app, you get the things that you like the most, the things that are recommended to you. You now have a wide range of, films and episodes about very different things and independent producers. So it's not just the big Hollywood stuff right now, it's also the independent stuff. And I reflected a lot at the time when Adolescence was out. I don't know if you have watched it, but it was really powerful and it made me think what volunteering can do to young people in our current society. What is the power that volunteering spaces and youth groups can help people to have something meaningful to do between school and home? Like, what do they do with that time between the time they finish school and they go home and they finish their day, what is there for them? Are there quality volunteering opportunities for them to develop skills, to learn about themselves, about each other, about the communities where they live? So the power of volunteering for young people, it could be dramatic for them. It was for me as a young person volunteering for the International Citizen Service. So it's that we have to create those opportunities. And a young person, that used to getting responses the next day, that used to, everything totally digitized onboarding experience. So if you don't have the right technology and you're still using a spreadsheet in your computer, I don't think you're going to go very far with that generation, because they're probably going to find out about you on social media, on the channels that they join, from the influencers that they listen to, and they're gonna want a very smooth onboarding experience. And if your systems are not up for that, then you are not attracting those people because they will give up.
Sure. The systems and the activities.
Exactly. Both.
I'm minded a little bit like to think back to our conversation on this podcast we had before with Catherine Johnson of Royal Voluntary Service, where a lot of her conversation with us, and it seems to be you share a similar view on this, Eleanor, as I think Chris and I do as well, but that there is a real onus on us as volunteering professionals, as people who curate, coordinate, whatever word you want to use, promote involvement in volunteering, that we're doing that in a way that enables as many people as possible to realise the benefits of this, because this isn't just about the benefits that organisations get. Like, volunteering is something that really transforms lives of the people doing it as well, and there is benefit in that, and we shouldn't keep that locked away. In fact, there's an onus on us to think much more broadly about that and how we can involve as many people as possible, so as many people can benefit from the act of volunteering as well as from the consequences of volunteering, to put it that way.
You're right. It's only in the last, I would say, 5 to 10 years that volunteering has become a more known profession in the sector. Like, there have been volunteers for decades and centuries. What is volunteering? Volunteering is doing something for the good of someone else or a group of people without expecting anything back other than probably a thank you and gratitude and just feeling part of that community. People have been doing that since the humans are humans, right? We have relied too heavily on organizations doing that in that way, without proper structure, without proper leadership. We see across the sector leadership in youth work, healthcare, social care, HR, learning and development. We are now starting to see leadership, role modeling, more podcasts, more professionals, more people talking about what good volunteering would look like for communities, with the impact that they make, and how organizations need to do better in that space. So it's quite, I don't know if you agree, Chris, what is your experience, but that's very much my experience. Only in the last 5 years or so, particularly after the pandemic, I have seen a strong leadership and, a bit more of kind of alignment in how volunteering becomes a profession that is valued and appreciated.
Yeah, I think I absolutely agree. And I think maybe there's a little bit of, there's been a bit of a crisis, and crisis focuses minds. And I think that has prompted a lot of people to really start to rethink volunteering. I saw the same thing in fundraising maybe 20 years ago, to be honest with you, and they've gone a long way. But I also see a lot of young, new professionals in the sector. Actually, one of the things we saw with COVID is a lot of people moved out of the sector. They were furloughed, they were made redundant, and we lost a lot of really great people. But those spaces have begun to be filled with new people, with new insights, maybe younger perspectives as well. And I think they bring perhaps a more challenging mindset in many cases to the status quo of volunteering, and are seeing the marketing challenges that you set out. And I think, I think the future is bright in that sense. I think there's a lot of good, really up and coming leadership in the sector, all of which listen to this podcast, of course. But so, I think that's great. If I'm honest, I think organizational leadership outside of volunteering hasn't caught on to that in such large numbers. And I think we as a profession have a job to do to realize that part of our job, rather than just managing and curating volunteer experiences, is influencing our boards, our CEOs, our funders to actually to realize that, do you know what, the paradigm has shifted fundamentally, as Catherine Johnson said, Matt, and we need to rethink volunteering, or we're going to find it incredibly difficult to get people involved in the numbers they were before, and we're in real danger of losing volunteering in our nation. So yeah, I am positive, but I think we've got a PR exercise to do with
100%.
leaders in the sector.
100%. And I think we need to move away from volunteer managers to movement builders. People who are
Yes.
bringing together people with a purpose that is bigger than themselves. People who are able to tell a story of change, a story that it could be campaigning, it could be anything that really helps people to have hope in a world where, well, let's be honest, not everyone wakes up every day with a lot of hope about what's going on around the world. So it's about how we tell the story of volunteering at the heart of almost saving us from a
Yeah.
robotic lifestyle where people cannot connect to each other in meaningful ways. So I think it's a huge opportunity. We need to go back to basics. We
Yeah.
need to go back to the basics of humanity, and volunteering can do a lot in that space.
And back to the basis of humanity is what you started on about, I think, 15 minutes ago around community. Actually, I think I think you're absolutely right. We need to be movement builders as volunteers. But for me, another word for movement is actually community builders. And I think we need to move our mindset from the here and now and the today, and making sure we've got the shifts covered on Tuesday afternoon, which we need to do, of course, into thinking about how do we build movements, how do we build communities of people around our causes, less about what they do, more about building belonging and inclusion and feeling part of something, such that, I mean, I often do it with ladders of participation. Matt and I have done that before, about working out how do people dip in and out of volunteering, but we still keep that magic thread that keeps them connected to participation. Even, let's not even use the word volunteering, to participating in our organisation. How do we make sure they come back time after time, maybe not every day, maybe not every year, but they keep gradually being dragged back into our cause and doing something in a way that suits them? And for me, that's about building a community. That's not about fulfilling tasks or putting people into roles. That's about creating an environment where people keep wanting to give their time to help our causes.
Yeah, and there are two things that I have learned throughout my career. So I have worked for some of the largest volunteer organizations in the UK, but I have also worked for small organizations. And I am a trustee for Peer Power Youth, which is a small organization based in London supporting young people who have gone through the youth justice system. And there is a lot. They have started, large organizations, charities have started to move away from saving people to enabling and empowering communities to save themselves. And that's something that I learned early days with Peer Power Youth, because Peer Power Youth grew surrounded by that concept. So large organizations are learning that now. They were created in the first place probably centuries ago to save people, to be the heroes. And these Peer Power Youth works with young people to make decisions about what changes the system needs to improve their lives and to improve their experiences as young people who have gone through the toughest things in life. So it's about very much working with communities to listen to those who are ultimately benefiting from your programs, from your work. If you don't go down to that level, and if you don't stay grounded at that level, then you're going to keep creating activities that are not aligned with outcomes, impacts, and things that are bigger than yourself, because you're going to kind of keep being in a place that doesn't relate to people on the ground, and it doesn't help them to solve their problems. And to be fair, St. John Ambulance have been doing a great work this year in terms of educating people in the community, helping people to gain first aid skills so they can support their communities. Particularly, that's absolutely essential for rural communities, and that they don't have access to, ambulance services, hospital, and they have to wait, kind of like for a long time. So if they need an ambulance, having people in the community who are confident in delivering first aid is absolutely essential for the survival of that community. And charities, including St. John Ambulance, and I have seen that in, when I was working at the British Red Cross as well, they are learning, they are finding ways to work with the communities and to be led by them and creating opportunities that are about solving their biggest challenges. And that's the future, really.
I don't know if you ever came across I don't know if I've mentioned this on the podcast before, but an organisation called Camarados.
I haven't heard of that one.
Yeah, I love them.
Okay.
But
Tell
they're a
me more.
mutual aid organisation, really. But they were set up, I don't get this wrong for them, but they were set up in essence to tackle the issues of loneliness and isolation in deprived communities initially. And they started by building living rooms in people's garages in a deprived sort of community, simply as a drop-in. So you'd open the garage, you'd build out with lots of soft furnishing, a piano, maybe an old sofa from the local tip, what I mean? But, really cheap stuff, but make it really comfortable, some nice little fairy lights and so on, and encourage people to come in and sit down and just offload, just make friends, whatever it means. And they don't even have volunteers, apart from what's the people who are given over the garage in that case. But actually, it's not like it's micromanaged. It's not like the volunteers are in there doing a particular role or preventing. Actually, it's people in the community are both the recipients and the supporters of each other. And it's sometimes, I suppose I give that is because that's an organisation that's just creating a space and almost community organising, as opposed to feeling they need to micromanage exactly what people are doing or to dictate exactly how this should happen. They provide the space and the shared benefit, which is make this a more attractive, maybe less crime-ridden community, is kind of delivered by the actual community itself, and they find their own ways of doing that. So, just what as you were speaking, just made me think of them.
But that's absolutely right. That's the future of enabling and growing and improving communities. Is about where the genuine problems are for them, how they feel about it, what are the pain points, and then who is supporting them. And we can enable them, we can empower them to do these things, but it has to come up from a place of curiosity. How is it for you? Real challenges. And it cannot come from a place of we are here to save you. And although there is my experience, particularly in the healthcare sector, when I was at Red Cross or St. John Ambulance, volunteering attracts people who are prepared and have the courage to step into the danger, either metaphorically or in reality. But people who are prepared to put themselves at risk, people who are prepared to be vulnerable, to bring others to safety. I think that's incredible. I think that's the type of volunteering that we really need to curate. People who want to do better for others. And that sometimes involves an element of being vulnerable yourself and doing things that perhaps are not what you expected. And there's a good reflection from me yesterday. You might have seen that on LinkedIn, Chris. I have been acting as a treasurer for this charity I support, Peer Power Youth. And I'm a people specialist. I have always been working in people functions, volunteering, the HR. So when my chair asked me to become an acting treasurer for a period of time, I was like, I don't think I'm going to enjoy this. I don't think I can do this. And it was with her care, her support, and she empowering me that I have given it a go, and actually I have enjoyed. I have learned, and I can now say that I have gained new skills and new experiences as a result of my own volunteering. And how powerful is that? And I wouldn't have done that, probably I would those are the sorts of things that in the workplace you don't really want to get involved. So these are not the things that you're not comfortable in the workplace. Is much more difficult to get involved in things that you don't like or that you're not attracted to. In volunteering is much easier because you might do it for people, you might do it for the organization, and you're more likely to give it a go because it's safer, and you know that people around you are going to support you if you get it wrong, and that's fundamental for good experiences, people experiences in general, but in particular volunteering experiences. Learning is at the heart of good volunteering.
So tell us about hermit crabs then.
This is so I'm a learning and development professional at heart. This is how I started at the British Red Cross. I was a trainer, I was a facilitator. So I have always been following people in the LNG space. And Andy Lancaster, in his book, in his latest book, he talks about the power of learning in communities and the power of community learning, communities of practice, people who get together to be better and to have the whole ecosystem to be better. So there is a story that Andy tells in his book about how they don't wait for the perfect opportunity to get a home, and the analogy could be the perfect training opportunity to learn. When they need a bigger shell, they get all the hermit crabs together, they get in line, and they try, it's a trial and error. They try different shells, they are in line, moving, kind of changing the shell and getting the one that is right for them. And there was someone who commented on the article, Chris, and said, this is a really important thing because when it comes down to safety, those hermit crabs, and if you watch the video, it's a very vulnerable moment because they're, predators could take them any minute and they don't have their shell, they don't have their home. So we need to create safe spaces for people to learn, for people to feel that they can get it wrong, that they can ask silly questions. And that's, again, really important when it comes down to volunteering because it's something there are activities and initiatives that you might have not done before. They might not be immediately obvious to you how you're making a difference or how you are getting closer to the outcome that you want to achieve. So big good conversations we have been having the last couple of weeks with those articles about the hermit crab because there is something that the voluntary sector needs to curate a bit more, and that's learning opportunities, and not all the training and not all the onboarding, inductions, upskilling should be down to the volunteer manager or to the person who is responsible for volunteers. We all play a collective part in that. As experienced volunteers, as mentors, we all have to give it a go. And we all have to be in line with those who need a new home, who need a new skill, who need to do something different and learn how to go about that.
I often think that we as volunteering professionals could collectively learn something from that as well, because we're quite an isolated profession. I mean, you've worked in some of the bigger organisations, so you hopefully have got slightly bigger teams. Most of the organisations, most volunteer coordinators, managers, experienced officers I come across are one person, two people in an organisation. And especially when it comes to sort of selling the benefits of volunteering that we discussed earlier on within their organisations, it's often quite a difficult task because they're a lone voice or in an organisation. So I think the more we can get together as professionals to network, to share ideas, to share learning, to explore, maybe unpick some of these issues together, I think we really need to be doing much more of that as a profession so that we could be stronger in representing volunteers, both within our communities, but particularly to our leaders and in the organisations we work with. But equally, because why would we keep reinventing the wheel? Why would we? When there's a whole load of hermits shells out there, why would we go around creating our own when there's actually a ready-made solution just down the road if we can club together?
And that's going to be more important than ever in AI work. AI can do better planning, it can have clever responses that we can provide, but the humanity, the connection, the support, the empowering someone, That's not something that ChatGPT is going to ever be able to do. So I think volunteering is more relevant than ever,
Yeah.
because we are stepping into a space where everything, planning, language models, they are all giving you the perfect answer to the questions that you have and the things that you want to get done. But actually, that's good in terms of logistics, efficiency, great. But when it comes down to getting down to the human level, that's where volunteering and volunteer managers are great at. This is the added value that we bring to communities in the new technological and digital era is the humanity. You
Yeah.
cannot get it wrong if you are more human.
So is all of this a little bit, I'm minded of some sort of almost going a little bit full circle when we said this is the death of micro volunteering, right? I'm minded of a conversation I had recently about, or I witnessed recently about whether this is actually just about perhaps not even redefining volunteering, but like all of this is volunteering, right? And maybe we just need to think about volunteering more broadly and in a different way. So it's actually more all encompassing and covers all the different kinds of participation and involvement and human centered approaches we're talking about, and community and social and peer connection. And I'm also minded to layer that on top of that with some of the other conversations we've had recently on this podcast, again, about then how you start to measure that and whether we're measuring the right things when it comes to what volunteering and participation looks like. And I suppose a step on from that again, which is like, and if we did start to do that, whether it might tell a different story about volunteering, and whether that might start to feed back into and building even stronger cases, if we didn't need it already, of doing things differently. Because actually my hunch is and I think this is what you're saying as well, but it's like a lot of this stuff's happening before our very eyes anyway at the moment, and we need to lean into it more to enable more of it, sort of thing. I don't know if that's true, but
No, we have to find new metrics. We have to find new ways of, it's not about what we have done, how many people we have reached out, how many people have participated, how many people have done how many hours. Is about what is the ripple effect. More people trained in first aid in a community. Did it translate into fewer calls to ambulances, but still, people receiving CPR and like how does it translate in terms of community impact in communities? If we educate communities to be more first aid confident, are we increasing the likelihood of someone surviving a heart attack? Are we increasing the likelihood of someone getting the support they need if they're choking? So we need to start finding different measures of success. That's not easy because, again, it requires intention, resources, capacity, most importantly, head space that charity workers don't have at the moment. So reinventing these concepts that we're talking about, they require a change in mindset, right from the top, right from the charities that are supporting the sector, like the NCVO, Association for Volunteer Managers. We need to start telling a different story of the impact of volunteering in communities and where the success measures when volunteering is done well in those communities. And the reality is that sometimes might not be able to measure how volunteering is supporting those communities because probably they have been doing it in that particular way for a long time. This is how it works for them. All I say is that let's look at it from a place of curiosity. Tell me more about how this works for you. Is it giving you what you need? Is it enabling the communities that you are supporting? Are you making your communities more aligned? Are you attracting people from different backgrounds? I think those are the questions that we need to ask ourselves. And if the answer is no to some of those questions, then you need to rethink how you're doing volunteering in your organization. Because if you're not attracting more people, you are not attracting different people, and you can really measure the impacts that your volunteers are making, then something needs to be thought again.
We may just have to start educating funders to ask the right questions as well, but that's probably a whole other conversation. So thank you ever so much for joining us. I mean, it's been what a wide ranging and what an interesting and deep conversation around, the power of community, importance of flexibility, and a person-centered approach to volunteering, the importance of focusing on impact and outcomes as opposed to just what we're doing, the learning between HR, L&D and volunteering, and how that can be shared further. The importance of flexibility for bringing inclusion into volunteering, which in itself is, it's not, as you say, not just because we're nice people, but because actually it's important to our very own survival of volunteering in our organisations. And then the importance of empowering local communities and local people to find their own solutions. So there's a whole range of things, and I probably lost so many in the little summary there.
It's been such a powerful conversation. Thank you so much. It has been such a pleasure, Chris and Matt. I have really enjoyed the conversation. Really good to be here.
Well, thanks for sharing, and hopefully people will take lots away from that conversation as well. Thank you very much.
Very much, Matt and Chris.
Well, Chris, what did you think about our guest today? That was another interesting conversation with some new insights and ideas and different ways of thinking about volunteering. What's your thoughts?
Yeah, I really enjoyed it, and I enjoyed it. I will put in the show notes the articles from Elena. I think they're, as the podcast episode has been, they're very philosophical. They're thinking quite in a big way about some of the core issues in volunteering. That issue of flexibility, which in my mind is mostly about being person centric, and actually not whether it's micro or whether it's a normal role of volunteering. It's about making sure that we're actually giving people the opportunity to volunteer in their way. That's the way I kind of interpreted that. But that was really interesting. There's lots about community, about both how do we empower the community to do things, but also how do we build and focus on communities of people trying to deliver for our organisations rather than be thinking about roles and so on. With that comes, I think, inclusion, or at least with the flexibility and the person-centric bit comes the importance of creating an inclusive and a welcoming and a person-centric environment that enables people to get involved, not just the people we usually see, but enables a much wider spectrum of people being involved. I liked some of the stuff around empowering local communities, but also I'm going to spend some time reflecting on it. Some of the crossovers between HR, L&D and volunteering it's clear that Elena has an OD background, and it's quite interesting thinking about what do those professions learn from each other in terms of moving from that kind of mechanistic thinking into a person-centric, flexible world. Yeah, so I'm going to ponder that a bit as the weeks go on, I think.
Something in there, isn't it? And I don't know if this is fully a sort of contradiction of terms, but like, what are the structures that enable flexibility? And a lot of sometimes flexibility is about getting rid of structure, right? Or removing structure. But I guess my personal take on some of that is that, we need to have, to maybe extend the curation metaphor, right? There has to be a gallery to put some of the stuff in, right? Or there has to be the framework to put some of the stuff in that allows people to walk through it. So, but the road to walk through it can be one that is, very well defined, or it can be one where someone can choose their experience in a much more structured, in a much less structured way.
Yeah, I suppose I like it. Elena have an OD and a cultural change background, and for me, I tend to think you may focus less on the rules and regulations and the processes, although some of those are important. But you do absolutely need to focus on the culture and the structure and the building blocks that enables people to come together. And I think that's sometimes where the difference is. It's not how, it's just how do you enable this? It's the enabling structures rather than the absolutely well-defined pathways that people need to go along. But you certainly do need those structures. Yeah, I agree.
Sure. My thoughts are going to the almost the very start again about the death of micro-volunteering. And I think I am starting to become even more and ever more passionately committed to this idea of we just need to think differently about volunteering and make volunteering a more all-encompassing like volunteering, whether we like it or not, is already flexible, is already micro, is already it's already all of these things all at once, all of the time. And I think we do well to start thinking about all of that holistically and challenging ourselves to maybe measure some of that in new ways as well, I think.
Yeah. Which is why I always love that model of the ladder of participation. and accepting that people aren't set. Not only will they do lots of things, but they're not set in one place in their volunteering journey with us. Actually, they'll be doing several things at the same time, and they'll be moving up and down the commitment levels with us all the time. And our job is to provide opportunities for people to participate in ways that suit them at whatever time in their journey with us. Well, anyway, another episode. I hope people found that useful. Please do share, as always, the podcast with your colleagues. We're really, really keen that lots of people get to hear this and more importantly, get to hear from our guests and get the learning that comes with that. If you can rate us on wherever you get your podcast, that's always great, because I believe that helps the algorithm find new people. So that's always good to have some ratings in there as well. And in the meantime, there'll be other episodes coming along very, very soon, I'm sure. So watch this space. Thanks very much. Thanks, Matt.
Thanks, Chris.
Bye. Hi everybody, it's Chris Wade here again from the Time for Impact podcast. I hope you enjoyed that episode with Elena and took lots of inspiration. I just like, as always, to remind you that Time for Impact is a podcast, but it's much more than a podcast. If you need help in your organizations around rethinking your volunteering strategy, if you need mentoring around volunteering, training for your volunteers or for your staff, or if you need help measuring the impact or measuring the satisfaction of your volunteers, Time for Impact has got a solution for you. Please do get in touch. We'd love to hear from you. Thanks for listening.